Everybody to this City Planning Committee meeting. In the room we have present Alderman Briscoe, Councillor Harvey, Alderman Barakis and Councillor Dutta. And do we have Councillor Coates online, Craig? Not as yet. Okay, we're expecting him to join us. So we don't have any apologies nor leave of absence. We don't have anybody to co-opt. I'd just like to acknowledge that we meet on the land for which the Muanina people were custodians for many generations, and acknowledge the Palawapakana people of Tasmania, La Trawitta, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Now, just a reminder that we are recording this on the YouTube video, this meeting. And just remind everybody to check in, or if you haven't done so, and please turn your mobile devices to silent or off. Welcome Councillor Coates online. Nice to have you here. Item 2 is confirmation of minutes from Monday the 28th of June and the special planning meeting for Monday the 5th of July. Can I have somebody move that? Thank you, Alderman Barakis. Those in favour, those against, items carried. Consideration of supplementary items, we have one. Councillor Coates, thank you. Those in favour, those against, items carried. Indications of pecuniary or conflicts of interest, do we have any? Nope. Item 5, transfer of agenda items. Item 6, planning authority items, consideration of items with deputations. Can I have somebody move that, please? Councillor Dutta, thank you. Those in favour, those against, items carried. So item 7, committee acting as planning authority, and we go to the first item 7.1.1 and 354 Davey Street, 2 multiple dwellings. We have representors, Mr. David Reid, and we're just getting them from the other room. Hi, welcome. You're Mr. Reid?
Yes.
Hi, Mr. Reid. Take a seat.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Reid, we have most of the committee here and Councillor Coates online. You have 5 minutes to address the committee, starting from now. Thank you, and we'll ask any questions that we might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to the Planning Committee for giving me this opportunity. Just in the 5 minutes that I have, I'd like to address 2 matters relating to 354 Davey Street. One is the fact that the building sits way outside of the building envelope in reference to 11.4.2 of the planning scheme. And I would also like to offer just the opportunity to very quickly just draw some attention to the visual impact that current development is having to the area. So I live in 6 Romilly Street, which is 2 doors down from 354 Davey Street. I also should note that I'm a former owner of 356 Davey Street, which is the adjacent property to 354 Davey Street. I'm also a qualified landscape designer, so I'm qualified to read and interpret plans. And I just wanted to focus on the 11.4.2 of the planning scheme requiring a dwelling to be contained within the building envelope. It states quite clearly in the planning officer's report that it does not. Therefore, it relies on the performance criteria. And to not cause unreasonable amenity by reduction in sunlight to a habitable room. Being a former owner of 356 Davey Street, unfortunately I can confirm that the only habitable room that has direct sunlight will be directly impacted upon by this proposal. And it's the only room on that ground floor that in the morning that it will lose its sunlight. In the planning officer report, it states, as a result, any potential overshadowing impacts from the dwelling at 356 Davey Street would be limited in duration to morning periods. And I would just like to confirm that unfortunately the morning period is the only time that this room receives light. And basically, as a former owner, I can attest to that and the pleasure of having that, and by the understanding of what the proposal provides, that this would cause overshadowing to this part of the house. And I understand that shadow diagrams aren't mandatory in an application, but I would love to make the request that to put the matter to rest, that perhaps shadow diagrams could be provided as part of the proposal. I'm not sure how much time I've got left, and I don't know if I can submit a photograph to the committee.
Certainly.
If I could, please. I just took a photograph this morning of the view from our house at 6 Romilly Street, looking across to the Watermark development in Waterworks Road. So this is the finished product, we assume, of that development, and a development of 20-odd buildings. I know 354 is only one. It's just the steep site and the scarcity of land results in buildings being built on stilts and well elevated off the ground. And for us, that is an unpleasant view each day that we see. And we're just concerned about the state of the visual amenity in the South Hobart, around the rivulet, where more and more of this development is occurring. Would hope that the Planning Committee would take this very seriously as far as the impacts on the visual amenity. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I open it to the committee for questions. Councillor Coates, do you have any questions? Nope. Okay. Councillor Data.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. Just with regards to the amenity that you have mentioned, that there's going to be loss, and you've referred to the performance criteria. It is my understanding that the performance criteria talks about the unreasonableness of it. In your view, do you think this is an unreasonable loss of amenity?
From what I can tell, Councillor Data, from the proposal of the building and the projected elevations, I do genuinely believe that there is an unreasonable loss of amenity to the habitable rooms of that 356 Davey Street, having lived in there between 2006 and 2010.
So that's on the photograph on page 24. It's the rear building, is it, of that 356 block?
Sorry, I don't have that in
Yep. Maybe I'll ask the officers in a moment. But you're suggesting that there's going to be a significant impact because of this development.
I certainly do, particularly through the winter, obviously with the lower trajectory of the sun. From my experience, I believe that habitable room would lose all direct sunlight through the morning period. And that's the only time it does receive direct sun.
And what's the habitable room? Do you know what it's used for?
It's a living area, yes.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Oh,
can I just
Councillor Harvey.
So this proposal doesn't impact your building directly?
That's correct, Councillor Harvey. Yeah, I live 2 doors down, but I'm a former owner of 356 Davey Street.
Okay. And in your view, is this a similar scale to the existing 20-lot blue corrugated houses?
Do you mean, sorry, the size of that?
You made reference to the 20 house development. I assume that's the blue houses.
I was also referring to the Watermark development, which is across the rivulet.
Oh, okay, yep.
For the stilts.
Yeah. Okay. No. Okay. Yeah. I'm just scrolling over that one
So
now.
just so that I'm sure, and maybe we'll get more information from the next representative and next deputation. But is there not a garage at the corner of at that sort of corner directly adjacent to the development at 356?
There is a garage, yeah, and 356 has a garage on the same floor, same level as they call it the ground floor. There's an upper and a lower to that.
Mm.
Correct. Yes, there is a garage there.
Alrighty. Okay. Thank you. If there are no further questions, Councillor Coates, you haven't come up with anything yet? No. Okay. Can you take a seat behind you, please? And I'll call on Ms. Danielle Gray and Mr. Keith Cam. Just you, Danielle? Just wait till Dave wipes the area, please. Thank you, Ms. Gray. If you'd like to address your concerns for your client. Thank you.
I've been engaged, obviously, by Mr. Keith Cam, who is the owner and occupier of 356 Davey Street. Mr. Cam submitted a fairly lengthy representation with quite a number of concerns. My concerns in relation, which I'll talk about as part of this deputation, there's quite a serious concern about the basic level of information provided in the proposal plans. It's my view as a planner that essentially there's not an adequate amount of information in order to make a reasonable assessment of the proposal. The proposed development it appears to be significantly outside the building envelope. You don't really know because the building envelope is not shown on all elevations. There's no AHD, or it would appear to be no survey information that the site plan has been derived from. There's only one side boundary setback provided. No other boundaries have any dimensions on them. And in terms of the information, in terms of making an assessment and being able to say that there's no unreasonable impact in terms of overshadowing, I'm not sure how anyone could make that assessment. There are no shadow diagrams whatsoever. This is a steep south-facing site with a gradient of around 50%. It's not 20% based on the planner's assessment. 20% gradient would be, well, certainly like, it's around about 1 in 2, the slope. So as you'd probably be aware, south-facing slopes have already, they're battling literally uphill in terms of getting adequate solar access. This house is located, proposed dwelling is located due north of my client's house, approximately north-northeast to due north. There's no setback dimension as to a separation between my client's house. There are no shadow diagrams. There's no definitive information about how high the dwelling, how tall the dwelling will actually be above natural ground level. As it currently stands, there's no information about how the degree to which the dwelling is located outside of the building envelope. There's no indication of when overshadowing will affect my client's land. The sun comes up at 7:42 in the morning to the far east in winter, and there's no idea whatsoever as to what solar access my client will lose on June 21 between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. as a result of the proposed development, which is the time frames that they're generally, once you get to the appeals tribunal, that they're interested in seeing whether or not a proposed residence receives usually around 3 hours of total solar access between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. We've got no idea about those figures. In terms of if there were any concerns down the track if this was constructed, I doubt that a council officer would be able to determine whether or not this had been constructed in accordance with any approved plans in the absence of basic information such as boundary setbacks. In terms of the assessment on overshadowing, the assessment itself, the planner's assessment, it's peppered with words like some inconsistency, similar to, likely to, unlikely, approximately, may also, appears to have. In fact, in the 6 paragraphs that assess the overshadowing impact, the words unlikely and likely are used at least 9 times. How can an adequate assessment on the impact of my client's property be made in the complete absence of basic information being provided on the proposal plans, including any overshadowing information of a dwelling to be constructed virtually due north of my client's property? Assessment. As you're aware, there's two different levels, state and local heritage. It's in a heritage precinct. The advertised documentation contains no information to address any heritage listing at all. In terms of the statements of significance for the new development in the Davis Street Heritage Precinct, it makes reference to garden settings and original lots. The subject site will lose half of its garden setting to a unit development. There's no heritage assessment at all. In my view, the design of the dwelling doesn't show any sympathy or any consideration with any heritage values at all. So in summary, in light of the deficiencies in the proposed application in terms of the documentation, where I simply cannot see how you can make an assessment that it is not an unreasonable impact when there is no information on overshadowing, which my client is seriously concerned about. His house faces southeast. It was I'm not sure of the year, it's probably 1970s approximately, dwelling, so constructed prior to consideration of
30
solar
seconds.
gates. So in summary, we request that Council refuse the application for failing to provide a basic level of information in order to demonstrate compliance with the proposal with respect to P3 of 11.4.2 with respect to visual impact, and also for failing to demonstrate that there will not be an unreasonable impact when it comes to overshadowing on my client's property at 356.
Thank you. And you did read the cultural heritage response on page 194? Okay. We'll start with you, Councillor Dutta, for questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question with regards to heritage. I understand you made a statement that there is no heritage assessment. I take it that the Hobart City Council Heritage Officer has made a report. Would you consider that to be an assessment from a heritage officer?
It's my opinion that if you are seeking development in a heritage precinct to a heritage property that's listed at both state and level, there should be documentation submitted on behalf of the developer that addresses the planning scheme. My understanding is there's been nothing from the developer to justify the proposal and to address heritage standards.
Just a follow-up question. So I take it then that's your opinion?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
Chair.
Oh, Councillor Harvey.
Could you please describe to me, like the house we're looking at that you're representing is the one that sits behind and below 4 Romilly Street? It's not coming up with a number on my map. Okay. And does your client's house sit at the same level as the proposed dwelling?
I can't answer that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, thank you, Chair.
Any further questions? Mr. Cam's representation was very detailed, as you say. Are there how many rooms are in that lower story, which are likely to be impacted?
Well, the issue is we can't determine the overshadowing degree. So when I spoke to my client, I said in order to accurately determine how this dwelling will impact his, he would have to prepare those shadow diagrams himself, which would involve a designer to actually model the shadow diagrams, but also a surveyor. There's just simply not information to determine what rooms will be affected at what time and how much sun will be lost.
Okay. All right, if there are no further questions, Councillor Coates, you're fine? Okay. If you'd like to take your seat again, thank you. And I'll now call the applicant, Ms Harrison, if you'd like to come and take a seat. Thank you. Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Speak at this thing?
Yes, speak
Thank
to
you.
the microphone.
Turn it round a little bit. There we go. Is that all good?
That's
Okay,
fine. And
I'm
you have 5 minutes to address the committee and raise your concerns.
Oh,
And if you
now
can
before I
answer, if you can answer some of the questions
Of
that have
course,
been raised,
yes,
thank
very
you.
happy to, because there's some real misconceptions going on here. Look,
Thank
I've
you.
prepared some photographs.
Just
Can I
can you-
hand those out, or?
yes,
Sorry.
we'll hand them out. Thank you.
Now, that
We're-
goes with that. That's
Ms
the
Harrison,
real-
Ms Harrison,
Yes.
we're recording this, so if you wouldn't mind
Oh,
going
sorry.
back to your
Look, one
seat.
to however many people you've got. There's 4 there. Maybe people can share, that would be good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Each
So,
page is numbered, so if I refer to that page, you'll know what I'm talking about.
thank you,
When
Rach.
do you want me to start?
All right, now if you'd like to start, thank you.
Okay, well, look, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. It's been really, really stressful for me. My husband died in 2017, so it's absolutely critical for me. I get into a smaller house. It's on one level because I'm ageing, and I plan to live in this house myself. So it's been a stressful process. So anyway, you know, I'm just doing the right thing to help myself as I age. Now, I've got a whole lot of attachments which I've given to you. Now, the one that really jumps out at me is page 47, where, of course, the council has on every single code or performance criteria of the interim planning scheme has approved it, and it says it satisfies all the relevant provisions and is recommended for approval. That's on page 47, point 8.1. I'm puzzled why there's so many representations, as they all seem to say pretty much the same thing. So what I'll do, and they all seem to relate to 356 Davey Street, so I'll focus on the issues to do with that property, which is the adjoining property, which has been mentioned. I'll go through each issue. Now, one that's been mentioned that's obviously of concern is the one to do with overshadowing. So if you could turn to page 10 of the sheets I gave you. Is everybody there? What it shows is a plan of the proposed building where it's sitting. Now, the point about the setback from the boundary, it's actually been measured. It's over 8 metres between the edge of the building and the next door property. Now, what I've drawn on that plan on page 10 in a blue line is showing the wall of the neighbouring property, which is actually a solid brick wall. There's one high window that's right up high, like sort of, it's obviously on another floor yet again, but the proposed dwelling and the property at 356 actually will be at exactly the same height. That ground floor of 356 is at the same line of height as the proposed dwelling. Now, there's at least it's actually close to 8 metres, it's been measured, from that wall, which actually forms the boundary. It's a solid brick wall between the proposed dwelling and the 356 Davey Street. And they're at the same height. Now, it's in the council officer's report on page 34, attachment A, page 35, attachment A, page 36, attachment A. He goes through all of the criteria of sunlight, loss of amenity, loss of privacy, and overshadowing, and makes the point over and over again. The 356 is actually orientated to the southeast. It faces completely away from the proposed dwelling, which is on its northern side. Now, there's been a few inaccuracies said about 356, because actually there is only one room of 356 Davey Street, which is the property in question, which faces the new proposed building. It's a corner of a sunroom, and that is the only room. The rest of the whole face of that property faces the opposite direction from the proposed dwelling. There is one high window above the carport, and the rest of it is all solid brick wall. There is absolutely no visibility for the proposed dwelling from there. Now, the council officer did not require a shadow diagram because he did not consider it necessary, because of the enormous setback from the boundary, and because he came up and he took photographs, he did measurements, and he established that it would actually make no difference to the sunlight that 356 actually receives. Now, 356, because it faces due south, is not a particularly sunny house, but this house will make no difference because it's far enough away from the boundary, it's got a flat roof, and there's only one window and facing it. Now, if you go to page...
Harrison, you've only got a few seconds to go.
All right.
So
Well, page 4, you can see a photograph of the garage, the brick wall, and the one window that faces the proposed dwelling. That's it. The rest of it is just brick wall, and then there's a strip of window high above the carport, which will not be impacted at all. So, in terms of sunshine and in terms of privacy and overshadowing, the conclusion of the planner, and I think it's fair and reasonable, that it is not unreasonable, given the distance from the boundary, and that they're on the same levels. Now, the other issue to do with heritage, on the back of that document I handed out, you should all have a copy of the letter from the Heritage Council of Tasmania, which states very plainly that they're happy with the proposal. On pages 197, 198, 199 and 200 of that attachment C, they outline all the criteria that might have been of concern, and it complies on all of them. And then on page 67 of attachment B, there's the official letter from the Heritage Council of Tasmania giving their approval and acceptance.
okay, Mrs Harrison. I'll open it to questions from the committee.
If anybody's got any questions, I'd be very happy to help.
Thank you. Okay, all right. Are there any questions for Mrs Harrison? Ms Harrison, I've just... So perhaps page 37 of the report. Do you have the report at hand?
Yes, I do.
So
that's attachment A we're talking about?
yes, it's attachment A, so you've probably just referred to it, but essentially that blue line provides the boundary. So there's the house at 356 is kind of juts into that space almost, doesn't it?
On the thing that I handed you out, is that the one that you're looking at? There's a blue line I've drawn which shows that brick wall, and that is all that's adjacent to the proposed dwelling is a solid brick wall with one window, which is the corner of one room. The whole living spaces, kitchen, lounge, all face the completely opposite direction. And it's the photograph shows it on page...
Harrison, can I just ask another question? So how far, how many metres is your proposed dwelling from that?
Right. The brick wall of the next door property is exactly on the boundary. It actually is built on the boundary. On page 39 it shows the configuration of that wall, and it's the floor plan of next door. So that's the boundary, and the proposed dwelling is on the other side of a steel turning bay, and it's over 8 metres distant from the boundary.
Trying to see this on.
Which is why the council planner who came up and measured all of this was happy that there was just simply no impact, because there were actually trees taller than the house is proposed to be, and they were not providing any shade, and he provided some photographs of those, and they're on page 4 that I handed you as well, which shows the trees, which are about the same height as the proposed dwelling, and no shading.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. Question number one, with regards to parking, it appears that you have one short.
I'm glad you asked that, Councillor Dutta, because actually on the front page of that little handout I gave you, I've attached a copy of the parking plan where the engineer forgot to number them. This has been uploaded to the council website, but he just forgot to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on them. There are 5 car parks, and it shows them there. They always were. It's an identical layout, as was in the documents from the council. He just didn't put the numbers on them. So there are 5 car parks.
Thank you. Just one other question.
Thank you.
You have on page 5 of the documents you've given to us, you mentioned Henry Hunter Mansion. What's the relevance of that?
Well, that's a very good question. What is the relevance of the Henry Hunter Mansion? I can see no relevance whatsoever because the building is 3 titles away from the proposed dwelling. The Heritage Council has said over and over again there will be no impact on the streetscape because the proposed dwelling is 45 metres from Davey Street. There's huge separation between the proposed dwelling, which is circled on page 5. If you've got that in front of you, there's a photograph. The Henry Hunter Mansion is shown on the left. It's a weatherboard, double-storey and Victorian Gothic building. 354 Davey Street is the brick one on the right. My proposed dwelling is circled in the middle there. It's several titles away from 6 Romilly Street. It will make no impact on 6 Romilly Street whatsoever. In fact, the Heritage Report commends the design of the building because it fits in as a contemporary, low-profile, flat-roofed, discreet, subservient building which will go well with the houses that are shown there from Waterworks Road, the ones that are also on poles, which you can see to the immediate right of the proposed dwelling. It's going to be the same height as those and the same design. Now, there was a suggestion that the only reason it's up on poles is to get the view. That is simply not the case. It's up on posts because
We haven't asked that question, Sorry. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Not, if you'd like to take your seat again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There are a few questions that there might be for Mr. Noy, so I'll open the item for discussion. Start with you, Councillor Dutta, then Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Why is it that the shadow diagram wasn't given?
Yes, through you, Chair. Look, normally we would require shadow diagrams where there was expected to be an impact. Clearly the officer in this case felt that the low profile nature of the building and its similar elevation relationship to the adjacent dwelling, and importantly the 7 metre setback in his experience concluded that there wasn't going to be a significant impact, and hence why we didn't put the applicant to the expense of providing that information.
So, sorry, I'll come to you in a moment, Alderman Barakis, but that's even despite the quite considered representation by Mr. Cam, 356?
Yeah. Look, these decisions as to whether those shadow diagrams are required or not have to be made up front, not necessarily in response to representations. The assessing officer is very experienced and has made that judgment at the time the application was lodged.
I see, thank you. Alderman Barakis.
I suppose I might be asking the same question in a slightly different way, but I suppose there were some comments made about the level of detail in the report. So just to clarify, nothing was required of the applicant as far as detail that was deemed by the officers not like to be relevant, I suppose, to the level of impact it might have. I suppose I might just give you the opportunity to respond to some of the things that were sort of mentioned in some of the representations.
Yeah. Look, there is a height reference of floor level, so that was one of the criticisms that's included on the plans. So we do have a height datum or height reading for the floor level of the proposed dwelling. There is building envelope shown on the front elevation on the documentation. Clearly it's outside and it's not unusual for dwellings in these steep locations to be outside the building envelope. But based on the performance criteria and assessment against those, the officer is of the opinion that it satisfies those performance criteria. So
Thanks, Chair. Look, Chair, if it's given that, I think, you know, whilst this is, you know, an application that goes outside the acceptable solutions for a number of criteria, I think it is as demonstrated by the officers, and I think upon reading the report, I think pretty well within the performance criteria. I think it does what it needs to comply with those performance criteria. I think this is the sort of development that we want to be encouraging in our city, so I'd be confident and happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Barakis.
I just-
Councillor Data?
Thank you, Chair. Just have one more question, please.
Certainly.
In the statements were made that there was absence of basic information, and they were quite serious. Now, if this was taken to the tribunal, you know, we'll be able to defend it?
Mr. Noy?
yes, but based on the qualified advice, I would be confident that the officers will be able to mount a spirited defence of their recommendation.
Thank you.
Mr. Noy, you sent advice through that PLN S4 may not be necessary. So that's in relation to the floor, the plan for the conditional endorsement showing that the floor level of the development would be no higher than the level of the existing adjacent driveway in order to clarify the scope of the permit.
Yeah.
So is that not necessary to drain the property?
Yeah, look,
or the driveway?
we had some late re-evaluation of that suggested condition, and it was the advice of the officers that might, while the intent was to, I suppose, provide some definitive condition around the height, the fact that it's got an RL level on the floor level of the proposed dwelling is sufficient to address that issue. But the implication of that condition, as it's currently worded, may have challenges so far as drainage of the car parking spaces back to the stormwater. So if it's below the level of the road, it's advice from the development engineers that you won't necessarily be able to drain that car parking area back to the stormwater. So it has unintended consequences, I suppose.
Perhaps, Alderman Barakis, you'd just omit that PLNS4
Happy to do
as
that.
part of your application, your motion. Any further questions? I'd just like to raise the issue of fairly basic plans before us, and I can understand some of the concerns raised by Ms. Gray with in relation to reference points and this being outside the building envelope. I understand because of the steepness of the block. Obviously, it's a landslide or landslip area as well. But I mean, do you think there is a scant detail in what we have to make our consideration, Mr. Noy?
Yeah. Yes, Chair. Look, the officers. Look, I'm happy to review that, but clearly the officers are of the view that there is sufficient evidence or sufficient information to make a qualified judgment on the merits or otherwise of the proposal. Appreciate the issues that are raised, and you know we'll always are open to review those submission requirements. But the advice of the assessment team is that it was sufficient to make a judgment on the merits or otherwise.
Okay, and there's no need to reduce the height or to step the building down in your opinion?
Not on the, based on the performance criteria of the scheme. As I said, we've got significant separation from the adjacent dwelling that could be impacted by overshadowing. It's a low profile design that minimises those impacts, and combined with the setback, it's the advice of the assessment planner that those impacts are within reasonable levels.
I see, thank you. And in relation to the parking and the number of spaces, is that reflected accurately with the information that Mrs. Harrison has provided us?
Look, we have a concern. Well, we don't necessarily agree with that. The visitor car parking space is problematic so far as circulation is required at that end of the driveway. So there's what we would argue is only 4 spaces are provided, not the 5.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Coates, anything from you? No? Okay. Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. Now, having heard the arguments presented and the concerns and the issues, and also the applicant's responses, and having thoroughly reread the report and the staff arguments and evidence, and putting that alongside the performance criteria, I have great difficulty not to support, but to support the staff report on this matter. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion which is slightly amended. I hope everybody has the gist of that.
Could you just repeat that, please?
So the PLNS4 would be removed, which is in relation to the floor level of the development would be no higher than the level of the existing adjacent driveway.
Are you comfortable with that, Director?
I am noting that we've got a RL on the floor level of the proposed dwelling, so we do have a level test is built in accordance with the approved plan.
All right, so I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion is carried unanimously, and that will go to full council next Monday evening. Thank you. We now go to 31 Faraday Street, West Hobart, 7.1.3, and we have a couple of representatives, one via Zoom, but we'll start with Mr. Ian Crawford once we get him into the room. Thank you. Okay, so if Mr. Ian Crawford could come to the table, please. Hi, Mr. Crawford, if you'd take a seat in front of one of those microphones. Thank you, and you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Thank you. We've got everybody in the room apart from Councillor Coates, who's up on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you to all the members of the Planning Subcommittee for giving me the opportunity to voice my concerns over this proposed development. Could I direct you to page 433 of the agenda? And in this report, page 19, figure 11, shows our property's view of the rear aspect of 31 Faraday Street. Page 11, figure 10, shows the western elevation of the plans, and these are the two items that are important to be able to look at by way of explanation. Our property shares the rear boundary of the development and is at an elevation at the ground floor level with two-storey property. The ground floor level, it's at an elevation of about 5 metres to the property development concern, and on the first floor level about 8 to 10 metres. When it was built more than 100 years ago, it was orientated to face east, unlike most of the houses in that street. So all of the main living areas face east, and there's a veranda extending the length of the house which also faces east. Referring to the submitted plans, which are on page 11, you'll find on page 11, figure 10, this shows the area of concern for us, a west-facing vertical glazing in the roof extension, which covers an area of about 1.25 by 3.7 metres. And it's at a height level with the ridgeline of the rear roof gables, which you can see from the photo shown on page 19, figure 11. This will be in our direct line of sight from the various living areas and will result in a loss of amenity from glare and visual impact. And according to the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme 10.4.2A3, we believe it fails to meet the criterion P3A4. We note the planner's sympathy for this issue, but believe the reason advanced for declining a light spill, that is that it was an 11-metre setback from the rear boundary, fails to acknowledge that the light pollution travels a far greater distance than this. We also respectfully disagree with the conclusion that this development does not detract from the cultural heritage of this precinct, and we note that it will be clearly visible in the public realm from people using Craigside Avenue. We therefore believe that under the Heritage Code E13.8.2, it fails to meet the performance criterion at P3. We wish to point out that our first notification of this development as a neighbour was via a council letter. But given our concerns, we were obliged to make a representation. Nonetheless, on Friday the 2nd of July, we reached out to the owners with a potential solution and also to offer a visit to our property for discussion. Your own planner also contacted the architect with a potential solution, but this was dismissed. Having not heard back from the owners by last Friday, we had no choice but to proceed to this deputation. And after lodging our form, we were contacted by the owners, who the following day visited our property, that's the 17th of July, and discussed the issues around this particular clear-story development. It seems, on discussion, that their main reason for the vertical glazing is to be able to view the leaves on the tree in their back garden. They conceded that this may still be achieved with a lower height to the glazing, and this is a matter for further consideration. Members, it's my belief that you're being asked to reach a decision on a matter that sadly remains unresolved. And it's our hope that you'll give earnest consideration to the merits of this deputation.
Thank you very much. Now I open it to the committee for questions. Are there any questions? Councillor Harvey.
So do you think a compromise could be reached with a bit more time?
That's definitely our hope, yes.
What's the period of, for this to be decided?
Expiry date's the 25th of July. So we would need an extension of time.
It's always best if there can be discussions, but to come up with some sort of compromise if possible. Are there any further questions of the representative, Mr. Crawford? So, Mr. Crawford, I mean, I know what it's like to get light from a window that you don't really want to get, particularly at night. So, what sort of rooms would this impact upon? Do you feel?
Well, which rooms? I'm sorry.
From your perspective, from your house.
All of the main rooms that we live in. So there's the main living lounge room area, the dining room area, the downstairs bedroom area, and 3 upstairs bedroom areas.
Okay, and if there were conditions in relation to this window, you know, as far as opaqueness goes or whatever, would that satisfy some of your concerns?
Sorry, I can't.
If it was conditioned so that there was less light coming out of those windows, so to speak, would that allay some of your concerns?
Would I think our consideration is that if there was less light, we're talking about decreasing the area of glazing. Is that, or are we talking some sort of shielding?
Probably shielding, but we'll discuss that with the director in a moment. Yeah. Okay. All right. Are there any further questions, Councillor Coates? Do you have any questions? No. Okay.
Can I just
Councillor Harvey. Yep.
So the light spillage onto your property.
Yes.
You're assuming that there's no blinds on these windows that will be lowered of an evening?
No, we're not assuming that at all. I mean, the issue really is about the glare will emit anyhow.
So the glare from the windows during the day?
As well, yes.
And this will this also remove part of your view from your property?
No, it won't obstruct our view from our property.
Further, it sits quite a lot lower than your house, doesn't it?
Correct.
Yes. Okay. If there are no further questions, can you take a seat at the behind you, please? And we have via Zoom Mr. Brett Doubleday. Hello, Mr. Doubleday. You're speaking on behalf of Penny Archer. Thank you. So if you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Brett Doubleday and I'm making a submission on behalf of Penny Archer of 22 Bonington Road, West Hobart, which is adjoining Ian's place who just spoke. Firstly, I'd like to state the obvious. If the proposed building extension was within the acceptable building envelope, then this meeting would not be happening. The plans would have been approved. Part of the benefits of the acceptable building envelope is to provide proportionality and scale to buildings. And the question Penny is asking is, why is this particular application possibly being exempted? What architecturally redeeming features are being displayed to merit such consideration? Penny's concern is, as a consequence of breaching the acceptable building envelope, a large light box effect will be created on the north face of the extension, effectively light pollution. There will also be a light box effect from the west face of the extension. Penny believes this will have an impact on her amenity. Penny's living space faces east, which will be directly impacted by the north and west facing highlight windows. What would have been appreciated at the outset would have been an on-site invitation to appreciate the height and scale of the proposed extension and to ascertain personally whether the consequences of breaching the building envelope would indeed be cause for concern. One possible solution would be to have motorised blinds fitted on a timer, possibly to go down 1 hour after sunset and rise 1 hour before sunset. The desire for natural light is not being questioned, just the possibility
Thank you. Now, do we have any questions? So, Mr. Doubleday, if there were some glazing and reduction in what's the word? Sorry, if there were some glazing and some treatment or the use of blinds, would that satisfy some of the concerns?
Yes, it would satisfy some of the concerns, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any further questions? Nope, no further questions, thank you. Now we have Mr. Daniel Lane with the owners Sam and Steph Lorimer. So if you'd like, oh, it's just you, Mr. Lane? Okay, all right. So if you can address some of the concerns raised, please.
Absolutely. I'd like to say, first of all, our clients have really tried to be respectful with this development. I have got a PDF which I sent through earlier today, which might just assist with a few little things as well. Basically, the existing building and the existing sort of existing home, there is actually, I suppose, the new works pretty much cover the area of the existing and then like a cut-out area into the site at the moment. You can see on the left-hand side is where the existing building is, and there's a cut-out on the right-hand side. Our new proposal is actually sort of covering, I suppose, or accommodating that sort of footprint of the area. The site itself is actually very steep, and the building is, not undertaking any further cut to the site. If we go to the next slide. So, given the, I suppose, the next slide.
Next slide, Craig. Oh, if you've got a...
There's a...
I can do it?
Yep. I'd have to lift it up a bit.
Yep.
So, as the building is actually built into the site under the existing condition without any further cut, we've actually got these roof little pop-ups which actually pop up to draw in light of the daytime, but also our client wanted to look at the tree, which is an established tree in the back of the yard, the garden as well. Here we're showing a site section through the building, and what I'm trying to show here is the little pop-up sort of shown, which is in red, and the distance of the neighbouring properties to the left, I suppose, are up the hill, which is some 30 metres away from, I suppose, this little roof extension. As I say, like the idea of this little roof extension is to draw light into our client's home, but also to look at the tree during the daytime. And I suppose that the top of that roof light is actually, I suppose, below the ground level or the floor level of the properties up above or up the hill. So I suppose we're sort of feeling that the amount of light spill from that component of wall or glass or whatnot is actually a very small amount. The actual roof light pops up about this height above natural ground level, where in actual fact, if you look down the bottom right-hand corner of that drawing, we're actually showing the extent of where, I suppose, the little pop-up comes out of, pops up above ground level versus what the planning envelope suggests we could potentially build within. So I suppose we're feeling that the actual extension or the extent that we're actually sort of, building above what the existing roof line is very, very minimal, and we sort of felt provided very little impact on the neighbouring properties. Through the process, we did actually speak with the neighbours which we felt were being affected, which are those on the right-hand side of our property, which is on the northern side, and they had no issues with the development. We didn't go and speak with those up the hill because we felt that the building was actually, or the development was far below what we live in a hill in suburbia, and so, we felt the impacts were going to be very, very minor. I do understand that our clients have sort of indicated to the neighbouring neighbours that they intend to put blinds on those windows overnight time, just to sort of keep the warmth and the heat within the building overnight time.
If there was advice relating to that, would that be acceptable to your clients?
I think blinds would be fine, yes. I mean, it is an expectation that a client would probably put blinds in there. I know there has been some discussion as to whether skylights would be appropriate. Skylights we don't think would be appropriate because, in fact, skylights from a view line perspective would actually enable more view into the house than what a little roof pop-up would do. And so that would actually impede our client's privacy.
that all that you wanted to present? Okay, great, thank you. I'll open it to the committee for questions. We'll start with you, councillor Harvey.
So what's the room below that pop-up light? That
It's
pop-up roof?
the kitchen.
The kitchen?
Yeah, that pop-up light, one's the kitchen, and then there's another pop-up over the living space as well, which will draw light into the middle of the extension. But the one over the kitchen's really to look at the back of the tree. It's a beautiful old tree, and we sort of wanted to, from that kitchen space, look up into the branches.
Okay, so the tree would be obscuring the light anyway from the neighbour up the hill? And you're not going to cut the tree down?
No, definitely not. We don't want to, and that's why we haven't sort of, we've limited any excavation on the site. There's a retaining wall at the back of the property currently, which is 2 metres high. So our building is still at a lower level from where the ground level is up here, and that's why we're wanting to look up into the tree.
The deciduous?
But at the moment, this time of year, it'd probably be, obviously no leaves.
And the final thing, Chair, through you, the pitch of that roof, you haven't thought about lowering the pitch slightly?
We didn't, because we felt that it's actually only coming to this high above natural ground level. It's not even the height of a single-storey building above natural ground level.
Just for councillor Coates, what height is that? Roughly?
About 2.2 metres.
Right, thank you.
So if you're, sorry, Chair, so if you're standing out the back of the house, you're standing on an elevation?
Yes, you are. Yep. And the other thing as well is along the boundary, the rear boundary of the property, there's a 3.3 metre high hedge, which will obstruct the view from the neighbouring properties as well, we believe. I think on the very last slide, there's actually a view from our client's property. Oh, I can do that, can't I? The left-hand image is when we stand on that elevated section of land, and that's the hedge with the house in the background.
So that's looking which way? Up to
Up
Bonington?
the hill.
Yep, okay, thank you. Alderman Briscoe.
Yeah, my question through you, Chair, was about the hedge. The hedge is on your neighbour's property, not your property, or your client's property?
It's on the boundary as far as I'm aware.
It's on the boundary. Right, okay, thanks.
Sort of, it's coming over. Well, it's coming over into our property by about 3 metres as well. So I'm
So
not
it's
sure.
a boundary hedge.
It's a boundary hedge. Yeah.
Alderman Barakis.
Thanks, that's good. 2 questions. So that photo on the left, is that taken roughly from the elevation of the light box?
It's taken from standing there, just went click.
Okay.
So the height of the roof would be a little bit higher. About
So
6
it wouldn't be too much higher than what that photo's taken from then?
No.
Okay.
No.
Sorry, can we go back a slide?
Yep.
I might have missed what you said earlier. If you're that person on the elevation on the top left, how much higher are you than the pop out?
If you stand at ground level on the top left,
If I'm that person there, yep. How much higher am I than that?
that's on the upper level of the adjacent property, and it's significantly higher. I couldn't tell you exactly. We didn't have the property surveyed. We've just interpolated the ground level from existing drawings and what the contours we have from LiDAR. But I haven't got a measurement on that height. But it's significantly elevated from...
So I suppose if I was going to ask you, if I was standing there, how much would I be able to see over the top of the hedge? You wouldn't be able to answer that without the survey.
I've marked in red what we think you'll be able to see over the top of the hedge from the upper level, not the main living level, I believe.
And through you, Chair, and
Yes.
the slide after this one where you had the hedge, and there's that tree you're attached to.
Yes.
So you're looking through a tree and looking through the hedge
Yes.
at the neighbours.
Just in relation to those queries that were raised by Mr. Crawford, and whilst they are not directly, well, they think they're going to be directly affected. I'm just curious as to why you wouldn't actually meet with them, given they're a direct neighbour anyway.
Well, we actually looked at the property. We feel as though we're actually we're under 1 storey, the extension, above natural ground line. the adjacent property is 30 metres away from us, and we don't believe that you're going to see a great deal. It's no different to sitting in your front garden, you're in suburbia, looking across the road to the property across the road at their window.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the way it was, I suppose, was judged, I suppose.
I understand that. I suppose sometimes it's better to have some sort of conversation with somebody who might be concerned. It's okay.
We didn't know who the concerns were from until the planner, obviously told us whether there's some representations being made, and we're not advised who the representations are made from. We're not allowed to know.
No, but I thought that Mr. Crawford had said that he tried to contact the neighbour, the applicant. But anyway, that's fine. It's been
after that complaint had been made. We didn't know that they had any concern until we heard about the council complaint, and we didn't engage them to begin with prior to putting in the council plans because we honestly did not believe they would be that effective. Genuinely didn't think they would engage with our neighbours either side because we did think they would be.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Lane, if there were just checking the conditions now, and Mr. Noy, if you can so some of those concerns were raised. Have we got suggested conditions, or are they as part of the suggested?
Yeah. Clearly the officers are comfortable with the proposal as presented against the performance criteria, but if council were of the mind, or committee were of the mind to want to provide further suggestions around the reflective nature of the glazing and or blinds, encouraging the applicant to include blinds.
So as an advice?
As an advice, yeah.
I'm happy to move the recommendation with the... Oh, sorry, we haven't opened yet, have we?
To ask the question first. So would that be suitable, or you'd be agreeable to that?
It'd be just advice, not a condition.
As an advice, yes. I mean, at the end of the day, I think our clients will more than likely put blinds in there anyway.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there are no further questions, if you'd like to take your seat again, thank you. And
to start the ball rolling, I move the officer's recommendation with that additional advice.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments?
I'm happy to support that, Chair. I think just going over it, the issue with the sort of quote-unquote light box effect that the development might have, I think, looking at how it's orientated relative to the topography, relative to the hedge and the tree, I think it's largely mitigated just by the natural geography there. So look, I'm pretty comfortable with this. Looking at this, the effect on neighbouring properties will be pretty minimal. So I'm happy to support that.
Thank you. No, so this is a decision of committee, is it, tonight?
That's correct.
Okay.
If it supports the officer's recommendation.
All right, with that relatively minor amendment to take in some sort of, so glazing as well as appropriate glazing and
the
blinds.
The applicant can consider blinds and appropriate treatment of the glazing.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion or comments? If not, I'll put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried unanimously. So that decision is made. So it is approved. Thank you. Okay, thanks. People? Yep, okay, thank you. But no further deputations? No, okay, great. So that's, what number is that, Rach? 331? 1354, Davey. 331 Faraday.
So it's 76 Liverpool Crescent coming up next.
Are they here, or did you say? Yep, okay. Oh, okay. So perhaps we'll go to those first? Yep, okay. Just because we have interested parties here tonight for 331 Davey Street, which is 7.1.5, and then the supplementary, I wonder if somebody would move that we hear those first. Thanks, thanks Alderman Briscoe. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. So we go to 331, 7.1.5, 331 Davey Street. It's an outbuilding pergola. I'll open the item for discussion. So this is a retrospective application for a pergola at the back of the yard at 331 Davey Street. And there were a number of representations concerned about the position on the back fence and drainage, which is kind of not relevant to this application as far as I'm aware. Is that right? Yep.
That's correct.
Thank you. Have somebody move this?
Recommend for approval?
Yep.
I'm happy to move the item.
Thank you. Discussion? No discussion. I think the fairly minor concerns, particularly given this was really a replacement of something that was existing. So I'll put the motion as moved by Councillor Harvey. Those in favour?
Aye.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't the previous one.
Those against?
Sorry,
So those in favour of this?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. We'll now go to the supplementary agenda, and the item is item 13, 646A Sandy Bay Road. So this is the Dirk Bolt building. It's recommended for approval.
Is this the Liverpool Crescent one, did you say?
No, it's
Sandy Bay Road.
It's on the supplementary agenda. It's item 13, 646A Sandy Bay Road.
I'm
Councillor
happy to move this, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments in relation to this? I just want to be convinced that the current users, the kayak, kayak storage will not be interrupted in relation to this, for their access to the building.
Through you, Chair, look, we have looked at that issue and are satisfied that access can be maintained with this proposal.
Through you, Chair, could I just
Councillor Harvey.
make a comment about waste management at the premises? So I assume they'll comply with current standards, but I was also wondering whether or not we could provide advice that supports our compostable packaging, which they'll have to do anyway. But the point I want to make is that if we could give advice that they provide a facility to recover that that compostable packaging. So the advice would be that a appropriate receptacle be provided so that takeaway compostable packaging can be returned.
No problem with that as an advice clause.
Mm-hmm. Because I do say it'll generate a lot of waste in the area, a lot of packaging, and if that could be returned and placed into a container, that's what I'd be very happy with that.
Can I just query that, Chair?
Alderman Briscoe.
Councillor Harvey was just considering having a bin for that particular waste stream.
Well, for that particular
waste.
Well, there's already packaging companies that provide a receptacle that they collect.
A bin.
A bin, yeah, like a box, basically. But I wouldn't want to suggest where they buy their packaging. So what I'm doing is offering this as advice that they could look at having a receptacle rather than go into the waste stream. They could go into a bin that could be composted.
Rightio. Any further discussion?
I've moved the items. That's Can
with
I
that,
include that as a-
advice
Mhm.
clause. Okay, thank you. I'll put that. Those in favour? Oh, sorry, Alderman Barakis.
Yeah, look, thank you, Chair. Just noting there's some concerns about from local businesses, and I do appreciate those concerns. I don't necessarily disagree that there's a huge number of cafes in that area. So I just didn't want to let that go through unaddressed. At the same time, though, I think it is dangerous, or it's a slippery slope for the council to act as a regulatory body as to the appropriate number of cafes or the appropriate number of shops that should be in an area. I think that's a bit of a difficult thing for us to manage there. So ultimately, what's here complies with the planning scheme, and that's all that we can really consider. Noting though the potential impact on the local area this might have for other businesses, but that's the nature of such things, I guess. So I think really on the paper it warrants approval.
Thank you. Okay, I'll put the motion with that minor amendment. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. That will go to full council, given it's on council land. We move back now to 7.1.2, which is 76 Liverpool Crescent, which is an interesting application. We've got quite an interesting history.
I'm happy to move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you.
Look, it is an interesting history. I think there's a temporary, permanent permission sought for a temporary residential part of the sheds, which apparently they're already occupying, and then the dwelling to be created, and then the former use of the sheds would go back to my understanding of it, and there's a bit of driveway work as well. Is that your understanding, the director's understanding?
No.
That's a good summation, Chair.
It's fairly...
and no representation.
Yeah, and fairly heavily conditioned as to the steps of engagement, really. Okay, so you've moved that, Alderman Briscoe. Is there any further comments? Nope. Okay, I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. That's decided here, is it not?
No, it is.
Okay, thank you. Have we done Patrick Street? No. 7.1.3, they're all kind of West Hobart, aren't they? 115 Patrick Street, West Hobart. This is it's on the corner of Watkins Street, and that's steep part of Patrick Street. So it's a minor amendment, or an extension. There were no representations. Alderman Barakis, you're happy to move that? Thank you.
Sorry, could I just be reminded why this is with us if there's no representations?
It involves council land
That's
in
right,
terms
yep.
of the access.
So I just have a question to Mazabi, just in relation to density. I mean, it seems like it's this extension will take up the whole block. Is there no need for private open space? Or?
The assessing planner has done an assessment of the site coverage, which is defined in the scheme as areas covered by roof buildings. The assessment was that it was 52%, which may be lower than the developed footprint, but it was found to meet the acceptable solution.
That's okay. Looking at the picture, 52%. It looks like it's covered almost completely with
It looks more like 90%, doesn't it?
I can include those in the...
That's a garage. That's covered.
If it's roofed, it's covered.
Oh, it's covered. It's a roof.
And so just in relation to the dwelling or the building next door on Watkins Avenue, is that going to get any sort of light again from that the way that the roof is pitched? That you understand or not?
The light well.
So
Light
that's-
box. Well, I'm not sure whether there's any windows facing that side.
Oh yeah, it looks like there is. looks like there's light there, but if you have a look at the AO7. Is that all covered? No.
Yeah, no, look, there is, as I understand it, a carport on that side.
Oh, okay. So there's nothing really that's last light as we might have seen in Faraday Street.
No, there's a carport on that side that provides some screening for that adjacent dwelling.
Okay. All right, thanks. Now, who moved this? Was that you, Alderman Briscoe?
I'm happy to do so. Oh, well, there you go.
Alderman Baracus, thank you. Sorry.
Let him do it.
Okay, if there's no further discussion or comments.
Well, there is, I just don't get the 52%.
Don't push it.
It looks far more than 52%. Have you got your slide ruler?
Through you, Chair, I suspect there's a decked area which looks like it's developed, but was potentially excluded from the so by the time I take the area at the front and at the side of the property and not include the decked areas.
It's very hard to believe, isn't it?
We can confirm that.
Well, this is a decision that we make tonight, I think.
Oh, it is. Sorry,
Yep.
but yeah, there is there is some land on the roadside as well. So there is, when you add it all up.
Probably have to turn on your side to go along there, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So
All right, okay.
I'd be. We do have a program called Bluebeam that does provide this fairly accurate assessment for us. So.
All right, I'll trust you. Yep.
Okay, all right. It's probably good infill development and it's, or extension anyway, because this is more than one dwelling, isn't it? It's a like this is units, isn't it?
No.
Or
it's
it has been.
Back mansion.
It's probably.
Oh, sorry. It is. Sorry, you're right. Yeah. It is part of a stratum plan.
Yes.
You are right. You are right, and that's probably accounts for the 52%.
Ah, yes. Okay, that makes sense. All right.
52% where, though?
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
I suspect.
I'm going to have to do a drive-by, I just don't believe it.
I think there's a little bug in the program to work out.
Yeah. What did you call that program?
A blue beam.
Blue what?
Blue beam.
In?
Yeah, the blue beam. So the site is all of that site. So there are three. You're right, Chair. There are 3 dwellings on it.
Oh, so it's that big green patch over in the back there. Is that counted?
No, I don't think that's actually part of it.
If I refer you to page 364 of the agenda, it probably explains it.
Ah, okay, yep. Oh, it was a huge block once upon a time.
Okay, now, any other questions? You're satisfied? Relatively speaking. Okay, I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. We now go to reports. So 8.1 is the monthly planning statistics. Got a number of statistical reports here. Can I have somebody move that? Alderman Baracus, thank you. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. The building stats at 8.2.
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Any comments? No. I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. 8.3 is delegated decision reports for planning. Councillor Dutta, thank you. I'll put that unless there's any comments. No. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. 8.4 is the advertising report. Any ones of note?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The on the first page, 30 Davey Street is a fragrance proposal which is quite significant.
Oh, yes.
So that's next to the council centre, isn't it? Customer centre.
And another one of note towards the end of the list is 35 Melville Street. That one is returning after the matter was approved not too long ago, but they're making some changes to, mostly to the rear of the property, as I understand it, the parking, and they're trying to build in more screening, vegetation screening at the back of the property. Tuesday Crescent is on the list, although that was advertised prematurely and will be re-advertised once the general manager consent has been provided.
Okay, so those both come to council by the looks of things. Okay, now, Councillor Dutta, did you receive and note that? Thank you. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried. 8.5 is the visitor accommodation maps.
I'll move that, but I also want to ask a question about it.
Go ahead.
Particularly in central Hobart, does that include hotel visitor accommodation? This is short stay accommodation. Yes, right. Thank you.
And are these whole houses, or are they just applications that we know? Any application? Thank you, Rach. Okay.
In that case, I've got a follow-up question. Is there any way to get the differentiation between whole houses and just any application, or do we not have that sort of?
Look, we would have in the form of the applications that we've determined. It's just how easily it is.
I see worried looks. Yeah, okay.
Depends on how far back you'd like to go with that information.
Just from present forward.
Would that information be included in the stats that the short stay providers have to provide through the legislation?
Yeah, look, I'd need to take that question on notice.
So I just think if we're using this information and try and help our decision making, it helps to be able to break that down, because those different short stay tenancies have different effects on the housing market or whatnot. So it'd be good to have that breakdown. But it doesn't take hours and hours and hours.
Yeah. And then we could endeavour to provide some clarification.
I think that would be
next time around. Yep.
Would that come out as part of the short stay accommodation planning directive that report that will, which is on our action status report?
No, it won't necessarily. Not necessarily, but I can have a look at that for you.
Okay, so that's okay. Yep. Any further questions around short stay accommodation?
Yeah, one if I could, Jeff. I'm curious, just reading this. Obviously, there's only been 21 in the last 6 months, which is to be expected. Not as many visitors, but do you have any data around how many have come off? Anecdotally, of course, I've had the last year. We've actually had, there's 440 at the moment, but is that well down on where we were at the peak?
Through you, Chair, we don't necessarily, although given the state government regulated data requirements of the providers, we might be able to give you some indication of that over time. So, again, happy to take that on notice and maybe provide you with some information on that data.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. All right. So, moved by Alderman Briscoe.
Rachel's work for the next 2 weeks.
Those in favour?
Hasn't finished yet, don't worry, we've got...
Carried. Now we go to item 9, which is the committee action status report. And we've got a few things chugging away. Thanks, Alderman Briscoe. So there was one that looked like it was coming to the July meeting. Was that next July? No, not next July. There's the social food delivery vehicles. Yes, so we've just overshot that one.
We did.
Yep. Okay. All right. So likely to get that in August.
Hopefully, yeah.
All right. Thank you. And so to the smoke-free update. Is that likely to come back then?
Yes.
All right. I'll put that be received and noted. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried. Item 10 is responses to questions without notice. Councillor Dutta, was that you? Thank you. Put that. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried. Item 11 is questions without notice. Any questions? Alderman Briscoe.
A number of my questions haven't been answered from last time, but I understand sometimes there's a delay. I know it's imminent that we'll have a report about the cable car proposal, but in light of some representations that we've received lately, I'd just like to ask a couple of questions about the assessment of the application. Did we obtain a bushfire assessment of the proposal? An independent bushfire assessment?
I'll take the question on notice, Chair.
Second question, did we have an independent noise report?
Mr. Noy?
Yes.
Are you seeing that soon
Drag
enough?
it out.
No, it was a wonderful answer. No, it wasn't disappointing.
Okay.
It's good to have a clarity.
Any other questions without notice? You have one? No? Okay. All right.
Hopefully it's my last answer, mate.
Okay. We'll go to item 12, which is the closed portion. Can I have somebody move that? Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried.